So talk about intra-ride fueling. When we get into the ride, so we've had our nice breakfast, we understand what our recovery is. During the ride, at this time of year, a lot of people are doing, base training, zone 1, zone 2 stuff. But is there a guide that someone could take with them throughout the year where they say, hey, the session I'm doing today is X, Y, and Z. From this, I can calculate my consumption of carbohydrates per hour, because I'm guessing it's a sliding scale somewhere from at the low end, 40 or so, to at the up end, maybe 140. How do I work out where to land on that scale based on my session?
So typically you're looking for, first of all, for any effort that's over 60 to 90 minutes, you want to eat during. So use that as, is my effort over 60 to 90 minutes? If so, I need to eat during. One of the big mistakes that people make is if it's a 90-minute effort, they're like, oh, okay, I can just get by with the final 30 minutes. But just getting by typically means that you're going to come home and you're going to be ravenous, or you're going to end up overeating in the latter part of the day when you don't actually need it. So be careful of that, first of all. Then,
or is the adaptation different? Just getting by. That's what I always wondered. Like, just because I can go and ride 4 hours with no food, most probably doesn't make it a good idea. If I rode 4 hours but fueled properly, I got to be able to train at a level which is X percentage higher. And does that mean my adaptation is going to be X percent higher to the session?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's up to us to give our body the fuel that it needs to get stronger and adapt after each session and during each session. If we don't do that, what's the point of the session? It's just kind of staying at our baseline.
Yeah.
So that's huge. So that's a good thing to recognize.
Okay, so sorry to cut you off from there. So you were talking about the fueling guide for our intra ride.
Yep. Yeah, so then the sliding scale that you mentioned comes from the idea that we want to replace 40 to 50% of the calories that we burn per hour with fuel.
Okay. So help me understand this. So if I'm on my Garmin and I have my kilojoules open, how do I use that as a guide for what I'm eating?
So the thing is with that, like, they can be a great starting point, right? Like, if you have a power meter, that gives you more data than without a power meter. The more data that you can have from your Garmin and give your Garmin, the more accurately it's going to estimate what that calorie burn is, which is important. The way that I look at this is it's not as accurate as we would like it to be, unfortunately. However, if you're going to do the same type of workout multiple times over, say a 2-week period of time, you can look at the average from a similar workout, similar zones, similar duration from 3 workouts, for example. And it might tell you 3 different calorie burns, but take the average of that. And then look at, all right, I'm going to aim for 40% of the calories that come from that average. And that's what I want to consume during my effort. And then you break that down into each hour.
Kilojoules and calories the same thing? Or do I need to do a calculation to convert kilojoules to calories?
What's an example from what your Garmin is telling you? Let's look at this. So for like a standard ride.
Yeah, I'm going to say that kilojoules are my guess would be they're 30% of kilocalories, but I could be slightly off on that.
Yeah, so, they do need to be converted, because when we're looking at like kilocalories and calories, those are used interchangeably. But when we're looking at kilojoules...
Let me pull up my training peaks from yesterday, because I feel good about this, because I actually am doing my training at the moment, so I'll have to be like, hey. So yesterday I rode for 4 hours and 14 minutes, 210 watts average, and it was 2,634 kilojoules.
2,634?
Yeah. Now, I have my fueling from yesterday as well, where I was down to have 75 grams per hour during that session. Now, I don't know how I've arrived at that. That's just given to me.
Yeah, so it says that the kilojoules, 418 kilojoules equals 100 calories.
Okay.
But that is, if you're looking at, when I look at kilojoules and calories, then that only becomes like 629 calories, but that doesn't really make sense either. So let's see. Kilojoules, yeah, divided by 4.86.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting when you're working that out. It's just to give context to listeners. So I'm getting these recommendations from the nutritionist at the moment. So they're kind of presented in a, here's your plan for the day based on the session you have to say. But the goal of this conversation is really because I'm going to be more compliant with those recommendations when I understand the rationale behind them. And I'm not just going, they're telling me to eat 2 bags of Haribo today. That seems crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at your nutrition facts, are you looking at, like your Haribo or something like that? Is it telling you the energy from that in calories?
On the back of my, so all I look at is if I'm taking something that's basically pure sugar like Haribo or like dates or something, I'm really ignoring the calories on it and just looking at the grams of carbohydrates. So I'm just matching the grams of carbohydrates up from what I'm told to eat to what's on the back of the pack.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so there's a couple things that can come into play here, right? Like we can look at the grams of carbohydrate, we can look at the calories, because when we're looking at the 40 to 50% range, replacing that, it's talking about calories, but then we want to also figure out what does that look like in terms of total carbohydrates and the grams of carbohydrates.
Yeah.
There's 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate. So that's when in my head, how I'm doing things, North American style, right, is like that conversion works, because we're talking about 4 grams of carbohydrate 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate.
This is where I find ChatGPT super helpful, because I'll look at my dinner for the evening and it'll say, okay, you need to take 120 grams of carbohydrates, 40 grams of protein, 10 grams of fat or whatever it is, but you can't go over 700 total calories. And I'm like, how the hell do I calculate this? And I just throw it all into ChatGPT. I'm like,
yeah,
it's like, how much rice, chicken, and avocado can I have based off this prescription? And it'll tell you exact weights, and then I just weigh it out. Nice. And it's like, I didn't know how to make those calculations like you can quickly do in your head of 4 to 1.
Yeah, right. And one thing that I'll say here, I think that's something that's important for a lot of people to hear, is when you hear about this 120 grams of carbohydrates per hour, 140, these are top level athletes that are doing that. That doesn't mean that the standard like athlete that's working a full-time job and going out and riding on the weekends and doing some other workouts throughout the week should necessarily be aiming for that or needs that. There's adaptations that come with that. And by adaptations, I mean like people have to get very intentional about meeting that goal if they need it, but not just more does not always mean better, because it depends on the person.
Point. So here's the big question, because what do most weekend listeners do? What most people listen to this podcast, how do they feel? Stop the coffee shop. So when we think about a mid coffee shop or mid-ride stop, and I'm having my scone up my jam and my cream, how do I start to think about factoring that into my nutrition plan then for the day? Like, is that deemed intra-session fueling, or is that like falling into a different category all on its own? And how should I adjust the rest of my fueling strategy based on this coffee shop? Because a lot of time, like a pro expression is like cafe legs, when you come out of the coffee shop and you can't ride for the next 20 minutes because the scone is just stuck to you.
Exactly. Yes. Because a lot of times people are under fueling because they're thinking, oh, I'm just going to eat when I get to that cafe stop. So they under fuel, and then they get to the cafe and they're in front of all this food, and their brain just tunnel visions them to all the food and all the carbohydrates. And then they eat way more than they need in one sitting. And then they get back on the bike and their body has not had the time to digest that, because it's been just this big bolus of calories and carbohydrate in one sitting. What's more effective is to slow drip your fuel throughout every single hour. So have multiple feeding opportunities throughout the hour so that you give your body time to digest those smaller boluses of carbohydrate.
You're like the fun policer.
Yeah. It's a thing for sure. The cafe legs, I love that. I haven't heard that before, but it's definitely a thing.
Because you're totally right. Because going into, I'm putting myself back into before I was looking at this fueling strategies. If I'm riding 2 hours, I'm like, I'll make it to the calf. It's only 2 hours away. Then I get to the calf. But in reality, I've been hanging on for the last 20 minutes. And then I get there and try and convince everyone that there's no social taboo around having like 4 slices of carrot cake. And so I'll eat way too much. I'll get the huge sugar spike, the huge sugar crash, which I've watched that on the Super Sapiens app when I used to use it. And then it actually ruins your fueling for the entire rest of the session as well, because you're not sure when you should start eating again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you don't really feel like starting to eat again because you're just so full of all that carbohydrate. So what I tell people is, like for the person that's listening to this and is just wondering, okay, you guys just had this big conversation about converting calories and carbohydrates and all that kind of stuff. Like, where should I actually start? Start with where you're at now, which is, if you're under fueling, it's probably like maybe 30, 40 grams of carbohydrates, or let's say, 100 to 150 calories per hour, depending on how you're talking about it. Add 50 extra calories, or add 25 grams of extra carbohydrate for your next effort and see how that feels. And then add another 25 grams of carbohydrate or another 100 calories, right? You can go up like 25 grams of carbohydrate or 100 calories extra from where you're at right now and see how you feel. And do that consistently for a week and then see how you feel. And you're probably going to feel a lot better. But also know that you probably don't need to be eating 400, 500 calories for the average person, or, over 100 grams of carbohydrate for the average person.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. Click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.